Hello, you're watching Sky News Live on Facebook. I'm Tom Rayner, Southeast Asia correspondent, and today we've been reporting on what is the first significant legal challenge to President Duterte of the Philippines' deadly drug war that's been raging since he took power 7 months ago and has seen more than 7,000 people killed so far, some in the course of police operations, but more in the proportions, at least, in so-called unresolved or under investigation cases. Now, in those cases where people have been killed, potentially drug suspects being killed by either vigilante gangs or masked killers, there has been accusations made over the course of this drug war that police were carrying out those killings. Those were always that was always denied by the government, by President Duterte, and by the police themselves. But there is a court case that is progressing through the Philippine system, which is very interesting. And that is what we've been reporting on today. I want to tell you about it in a little bit more detail here on Facebook. So I'm going to give you an account, but if at any point you have any questions for me, please leave them in the comments box below, and I will do my very best to try and answer them. So let me set the scene. The drug war that was launched by Rodrigo Duterte was one of the main factor that he campaigned on when he won a landslide in the presidential elections last year. And 7 months on, it is continuing. But there have been some major developments in the last week or so with the police being suspended from drug operations. And that's because of a growing storm of scandals that have engulfed the Philippines National Police. One of those is the case that we've been reporting on, and that is the case of Efren Murillo. Let me explain what happened in that case. It all occurred in late August 2016 in a place called Payatas, which is a fairly remote, almost jungle-like area on the outskirts of Quezon City. And on that afternoon, 5 young men were playing cards in a small shack area where there was a few small houses, and 7 armed but in civilian clothing police officers arrived at the scene and accused those 5 young men of being involved in illegal drugs. They handcuffed some of them. They didn't actually have enough handcuffs, according to the lawyer's report, so they used some electrical cable that was hanging from the huts that they were playing cards in, and then proceeded to search the area. Now, the officers, it's claimed, found a piece of tin foil and found a cigarette lighter and said that this was evidence of illegal drug use. Now, what happened next was pretty shocking. According to the witness testimonies and according to the police reports, the men were shot by the officers. They were taken round the back of the huts and shot. 4 of them were killed, but one of them survived. His name is Efren Murillo. He's 28 years old. He played dead after being shot in the chest and managed to escape when officers weren't looking by going down a very steep valley and making his way to hospital. And after several days where he wasn't sure whether he was going to be arrested or not, was able to be taken into the protective custody of the Philippines Commission for Human Rights, lawyers who would represent him, who continue to look after him today. Now, he has, since that day, claimed that he and his friends were not involved in illegal drug use at all, and that they at no stage tried to resist arrest, which begs the question why the officers felt the need to shoot and kill his 4 friends and indeed Efren Murillo himself when he was shot in the chest. The lawyers for the Commission of Human Rights in the Philippines clearly recognised that Efren Murillo's testimony was going to be important. The number of survivors in this drug war has been almost zero. Reuters news agency did an analysis of some of the shooting data towards the end of last year, and they found that around 97% of people who were shot by police died. So the case of Efren Murillo is extremely rare. But what is interesting about this case is that although Efren himself was in protective custody, the families of those killed, and indeed Efren's father, say that the police officers involved in that killing kept on returning to the site several months after it happened in what they said was an intimidating way, where they felt seriously concerned for their safety and for their lives. And so they approached lawyers who basically last week put forward what's called a writ amparo, which is a legal mechanism in the Philippines whereby the High Court is asked to listen to a petition to protect the safety, the liberty and the security of the people named in that petition. And that's what happened, and the High Court granted an interim court order, which meant that the officers named as the alleged killers were unable anymore to come within a kilometre of the families of the men killed, and they were not able to continue their drug operations. Now, that in itself was an unprecedented step in the drug war. It was an unprecedented step because so many communities have been terrified by what's been going on, by the nature of the killings, and very, very few people have been prepared to speak out. I've reported a lot in the last few months in the Philippines, and people are scared. People are genuinely scared in the neighbourhoods where these killings take place. So this petition, which was upheld by the High Court, was very, very important. What happened today in this latest development is that it was heard by the Court of Appeal. That was the opportunity for the Solicitor General's office in the Philippines and the Philippine National Police to challenge that particular petition, that court order which blocked officers from conducting drug operations in the Payatas area or from approaching the families of those men that were killed. Now, the lawyers for the government and for the police chose not to contest that petition. Now, the reason they gave for that is that they say the government and the police's job is to look after the protection and safety of those people. But crucially, what they didn't do is dispute the facts of the case put forward by the lawyers of Efrem Murillo. Now, the lawyers say that they are a little disappointed by this because they hoped that the hearing today at the Court of Appeal would have been the first step in sort of putting some kind of guilt on these officers. That didn't happen. But what it has done, by the very fact that the government and the police lawyers have chosen not to contest that initial court order, is meant that now the lawyers for Efrem Murillo and for the families of those 4 men killed, they have now an opportunity to push for criminal charges. And when I was speaking to attorney Rommel Bagares, who is leading the legal case against the police, he says in his mind there is absolutely no question that what took place was cold-blooded murder. So that is the scene set. That is the situation in the case of Efrem Murillo. That is what is going to be taking up a lot of attention in the Philippines, because this is the first, as I say, legal challenge, substantial legal challenge, which gets right to the heart of the legality of the drug war, even though it is just looking at this one particular case and in the Payatas region alone. Let me see if there's any questions coming for you. I've got one from Sam, who says, how long did Efrem have to play dead, and how did he get people to listen to his story? It's unclear. He claims that he was injured, and so therefore it's quite hard for him to exactly gauge how long he was playing dead for. But he says that he was terrified and that he was very conscious of his breathing when the officers were still around him. But when he felt that they were far enough away, he took the opportunity to get down the hill and into this kind of river valley. And then he was able to scramble back up to a road and persuade a jeepney driver, which is a kind of public taxi, to take him to hospital. When he got to the hospital, the doctors there actually tried to call the police. They were police from a different force who did attend, and they tried to take him back to the custody of the officers who had conducted the killings. Through a series of quite complicated steps, lawyers and his mother were able to prevent that in the end, and he was taken to a separate hospital. But it did mean that it was a long time before he saw proper medical attention, according to the lawyers who are putting forward this case. Another question: how controversial is Rodrigo Duterte as president? Well, I think that is a good question for opening up the kind of broader context of this, because when this initial submission by the lawyers to stop the police being able to approach these families was placed, the police were very much at the head of the drug war. Since then, President Duterte has suspended all police drug operations in the drug war and has really turned on the police. And that's due to a series of scandals, perhaps the most high-profile one being the murder of a South Korean businessman in an apparent kidnap and bribery scandal under the cover of the drug war. The South Korean businessman was taken into the police headquarters, and officers made a call to his wife saying that he'd been arrested on drug offences, but if she paid some money, he would be released. Whatever transpired in there, it is still under investigation. He ended up being killed at police headquarters, and as you can imagine, that has been a case that has drawn great attention and great ire from within the Philippines, and the president himself has spoken very aggressively against that. And he's gone as far as to say that he now believes that 40% of Filipino policemen in the national force are corrupt, which is a pretty extraordinary figure. And has said that there will be numerous measures taken against them. He's put the country's drug enforcement agency now in charge of the drug war, and even suggested that the army might be brought in to help, one, try and arrest corrupt policemen, but also to help conduct the drug war. For all of that, though, there are those people who criticise President Duterte himself. While this drug war has been and continues to be very popular in the with the public, the fact that he had been so vocally cheering on the rising death toll, encouraging police to have no concern for shooting people dead if they felt their life was in danger, has led some to believe that he created a culture, an environment of impunity, whereby situations like the alleged illegal killing of those four men, those four friends of Efrain Murillo, were able to take place. Now, I put that to the chief of the National Capital Region, Director Oscar Albayalde, who I interviewed last week, and he said, no, that's not the case. The president said he would stand by police who were acting within the law. And he said, just look at what's happened now. The police have been suspended. The National Police Force is in disgrace, effectively. And so he said, he denied that this was anything to do with President Duterte giving police a kind of tacit green light to kill at will. But there are many critics who say that's exactly what's happened, not least Amnesty International, who released a report last week, which said that the way the police have been operating is effectively like a criminal underworld, and they said that some of the killings which they believe police have been involved with could amount to crimes against humanity. Now, the Philippines government dismissed a lot of that report and have said that Amnesty International haven't provided evidence to back up their claims. But it was a very high-profile report, and certainly opposition figures in the Philippines, and though there are a few senators who are increasingly vocal in their attacks, not on the drug war as a whole, but on the way it is being conducted, particularly by these controversial police operations, Tokang operations, or knock and ask, as the English translation would mean. They have latched upon those Amnesty International criticisms very much. I'm going to see if I can take one more question before we go. Let's see what we've got here. What's the view of the four friends who were shot and killed? Are the families angry? Well, yes, the families are part of that petition, which is now being upheld by the Court of Appeal. They cannot be approached by police officers now. And we spoke to the mother of one of the men killed, and she was distraught. It happened in and around her house, and she was saying that she gave birth to him, to her son, in the exact spot he was killed 31 years ago, and how hard it is to accept, and how she has so many questions about what happened. She doesn't know why the police would come to that area. It was very remote. She doesn't know why those police officers who were involved were even there, because they had no jurisdiction in that neighbourhood. And so, yeah, the families are angry, the families are scared, and the families have big questions. And I think those kind of sentiments are what fuel the determination that we have heard from the lawyers leading this case, who say that this is a very key opportunity to challenge the way that the drug war has been conducted. And as they made very clear to us in our interview, they will be pressing murder charges in the near future against those officers, and that will mean that Efrain Murillo, one of these very rare survivors of this drug war, will testify against his killers, will identify them as police officers in court, and that will be a very big step in this drug war. That's all for now. Thank you for your questions. Thank you.